Collaborate, communicate, cooperate. The fundamentals of any successful cooperative enterprise and of Cooperative Network's daily effort to defend and advance the cooperative business model in 2013 and every year. Amid contention over federal spending priorities, continuation of the Rural Cooperative Development Grant, or RCDG program, is a key co-op issue. These grants allow Cooperative Network to help develop new cooperatives in areas such as healthcare, senior housing, technical assistance, and local foods. Collaborating with the Farm Credit Council, Cooperative Network gave input this year to say-on-pay regulations under development by the Farm Credit Administration and worked with Farm Credit, Mutual Insurance, and dairy cooperative members on high-profile and still unsettled federal legislation, including the Farm Bill and immigration reform. Members in both Minnesota and Wisconsin will benefit from Cooperative Network's 7-year campaign for a common state and federal understanding of seasonal supply needs facing agricultural producers. In July last year, the federal government adopted hours of service changes critical to timely movement of farm supplies. The finishing touch was buy-in from state governments, secured by legislation in Minnesota and in Wisconsin through the cooperation of the state's transportation secretary. Producers in both states and their co-op organization will now be relieved of the need to appeal annually to their governors for special exemptions. Comprehensive changes to the nation's healthcare system are underway, and Cooperative Network is well prepared to assist co-op insurers and providers to meet the challenge. With experience creating new healthcare cooperatives like Farmers Health Co-op of Wisconsin, Cooperative Network provides advice and assistance to a majority of new healthcare co-ops across the country. With a federal health insurance exchange operating in Wisconsin, Milwaukee's Common Ground Healthcare Cooperative, starting business in January, hopes to offer plans mandated on the exchange along with other coverage. Cooperative Network provided guidance in forming the organization and continues to serve on its interim board. Farmers Health Cooperative of Wisconsin is moving into its 8th year of offering health insurance to producers and agribusinesses. Cooperative Network is assisting Farmers Health to adapt to the rapidly changing healthcare environment. Cooperative Network successfully worked alongside the Wisconsin Credit Union League to defeat a proposed merger of the State Office of Credit Unions into the Division of Banking at the Department of Financial Institutions in the state budget bill. Honoring the 7th co-op principle of concern for community, Cooperative Network was instrumental this year in doubling donations a credit union is allowed to give back to its community through legislation modifying Department of Financial Institutions rules. Also this year, Cooperative Network Government Relations detected an apparent oversight in a financial regulation bill, omitting credit unions from the institutions eligible for deposit of public funds. Corrective legislation was adopted so millions of dollars in state and local government funds can remain in credit union accounts. Working with its own members and other stakeholders, Cooperative Network this year led the legislative preservation of Wisconsin's agricultural chemical cleanup program. Historically, about 70% of ACCP payouts have gone to cooperatives, but interfund budget raids turned some agricultural interests against the program. Reforms recommended by Cooperative Network and adopted in the budget bill include a 20% fee reduction to eliminate surplus funds that have tempted revenue-hungry administrations and legislatures over the years, an end to random testing of sites, and an agreement that future commercial agronomy facilities won't be covered if they're built on greenfield sites. Cooperative Network's opposition to inter-fund budget raids also rescued PECFA funds, as the organization lobbied successfully to nearly double annual PECFA spending authority and work down a surplus, and persuaded the Joint Finance Committee, notably during Land O'Lakes Lobby Day, to authorize funding to cover claims throughout the 2-year budget cycle. Also, in response to Cooperative Network lobbying efforts, the Finance Committee preserved the statutory prohibitions on foreign ownership of Wisconsin farmland. Another budget provision backed by Cooperative Network revised the Agricultural Producers Security Law, giving milk contractors flexibility in calculating financial ratios for APS compliance. Every Wisconsin telecommunications cooperative is a Cooperative Network member, and together they're fighting unfair competition from the University of Wisconsin System's WiscNet, billed as a rural broadband initiative but serving only large accounts, cherry-picking the biggest users in small communities. There's no need for WiscNet because every telephone co-op customer can obtain high-speed internet and there's no waiting list. The Nonpartisan Legislative Audit Bureau discovered WiscNet's equipment is housed at UW facilities and every employee is on the UW payroll. Cooperative Network's appeals to the governor and the Department of Administration helped win an order to divest the UW's WiscNet assets. Cooperative Network hosted another well-received Wisconsin Farm Credit Legislative Conference. This year's conference received high ratings for its focus on tax issues and youth leadership in agriculture. Farm credit cooperatives will benefit from Cooperative Network lobbying success in matching up state and federal law on depreciation of assets, relieving farm operations of the need to keep two sets of books. The Wisconsin Statewide Telephone Cooperative Association this past year asked Cooperative Network to provide its educational programming, government relations, and administrative needs, and Cooperative Network continues to sponsor and coordinate special legislative days for individual co-op sectors such as mutual insurance and farm credit, for member co-ops such as Land O'Lakes, and has been laying groundwork for a high-impact all-ag sector co-op legislative conference to debut next year. Following the 2012 elections, Cooperative Network stepped up its new legislator contact program to educate a host of first-term lawmakers in both Minnesota and Wisconsin about cooperatives. Enhanced activity and new personnel have elevated Cooperative Network's presence at the Minnesota Capitol. In January, Patrick Murray joined Bruce Clavin and the rest of the Cooperative Network staff, previously clerk of the Minnesota Senate Transportation Committee. Patrick also brings experience in the Wisconsin Capitol, where he served on former Governor Scott McCallum's staff. All sectors will benefit from Cooperative Network's advocacy for director liability protection. As the sole organization lobbying on the issue, Cooperative Network was able to strengthen Minnesota law so directors and managers may safely rely on advice from third-party experts such as lawyers and auditors. After years of toil with the Minnesota Department of Commerce to get 40 Square Cooperative Solutions up and running, Cooperative Network faced a catch-22. The healthcare cooperative can't be licensed until it has 1,000 members and can't market itself to prospective members until it's licensed. Testifying about the roadblock before the House Agriculture Committee this spring, Cooperative Network got the attention of Governor Mark Dayton and state lawmakers. Direct advocacy by Cooperative Network members proved the value of cross-sector co-op alliances, and a solution moved through the legislature within 4 months. This fall, there's renewed hope of 40 Square becoming a reality. Governor Dayton this year proposed a groundwater study to be financed with higher water usage fees. The average household's fees would have increased about $1, but cooperative cheesemakers could have seen a tenfold cost increase. Cooperative Network lobbying is one reason the study will be paid for with general fund dollars, not a fee increase. Last spring, Cooperative Network mobilized quickly in defense of member interests as a proposed gross receipts tax on motor fuels, a stealth gas tax, brought direct lobbying contacts with legislators, a rapid response through print and broadcast media, and an attention-grabbing social media campaign helping to squelch the tax before it could gain traction. As in Wisconsin, where Cooperative Network killed a similar tax in 2009, the proposal would have sliced tens of millions of dollars from cooperative patronage dividends, harming the rural economies where those dividends are spent. Cooperative Network lobbying protected members against new financial burdens when energy mandates threatened to raise costs for Minnesota's member-owned cooperative electric systems. A mandate to obtain 10% of all electricity from solar generation, the most expensive source, was reduced to 1.5% and limited to investor-owned utilities. A proposed 2,500% increase in the net metering cap, the amount of customer-owned generation power providers are mandated to buy, was similarly confined to investor-owned utilities and limited to payment of avoided cost. The prior law requirement to net meter up to 40 kilowatts of consumer-owned generation at average retail rates remains in place. Credit co-op members and their legislative office visits during Co-op Day at the Capitol. This year's event saw participation by a record number, 75 co-op leaders from across the state. Looking ahead, Minnesota government relations will continue efforts to repeal equipment repair and warehouse service taxes. The latter takes effect next April, and Cooperative Network will communicate the need to clearly exempt agricultural products or get rid of the tax. As energy providers' ability to ensure reliable electricity at affordable rates is at risk of being deeply compromised by a rising tide of federal regulation, Cooperative Network's Electric Division and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association are as important to members as they've been in the entire history of rural electrification. The statewide electric co-op organizations provide vital communication, helping mobilize grassroots involvement as members confront increasingly costly mandates. This year, WECA brought some 50 co-op leaders to the annual congressional visits and spring legislative conference of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association in Washington, D.C. WECA made 2 more fly-in visits to lawmakers in Washington, in addition to home district meetings with congressional representatives. Leading the agenda were concerns about the Environmental Protection Agency ending beneficial recycling of coal ash and support for legislation to block this short-sighted policy. Alongside new EPA rules, a new Department of Energy efficiency standard paradoxically threatens important co-op energy conservation programs. Cooperative Network, WECA, and co-op interests nationwide have lobbied hard to preserve use of electric resistance water heaters as energy storage units, the backbone of co-op load management programs that help reduce the need for new power plants in some 30 states. Cooperative Network kept expanding grassroots participation in public policy issues during 2013. The year added more well-attended meetings hosted by local cooperatives, bringing legislators together with directors and staff at the co-op to build relationships and strengthen lawmakers' grasp of the connection between their constituents at home and WECA. Those relationships will be needed. Statewide electrician licensing, set for full implementation last spring, was stalled by the failure of agencies to finish rulemaking. Cooperative Network continues to advocate completion of the rulemaking and a trailer bill to address newly surfaced issues so licensing can finally proceed. In March, another well-attended education and lobby day in Madison communicated information about the increasing deployment of renewable energy and the co-op role in a changing industry. Lobby Day also brought more face-to-face visits in legislative offices, a second consecutive all-time record year for acre auction proceeds, and the annual Enlightened Legislator of the Year awards. A first for 2013 was WECA's co-sponsorship of a statewide energy summit. This year's topic was solar energy, and the goal is to make the summit an annual event. The flagship of Cooperative Network's dairy program is the Dairy Policy and Directors Leadership Conference, co-sponsored with the Universities of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Issues this year included milk marketing orders and responding to the malicious use of undercover video to damage the dairy industry. The raw milk issue has surfaced again in both states. After much lobbying, no bill was introduced in Minnesota, but a Wisconsin bill has received public hearings. Cooperative Network, following its member resolution, is urging defeat of the legislation and warning of grave harm to the industry's reputation if adverse health effects arise from consumption of unpasteurized milk or milk products. Wisconsin's Dairy Legislative and Regulatory Committee, made up of co-op personnel, has made itself the go-to problem solver for state regulators. Food safety and other regulatory officials have headed off problems by vetting issues with Cooperative Network's committee before proceeding with new regulations. Cooperative Network has also nurtured a more positive relationship with Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources. When the DNR wanted to end some dairy processing plants' ability to land spread milk wastewater, Cooperative Network countered that no test wells in affected areas had detected a groundwater problem. Applying a results-oriented approach, the agency will allow processors to operate as in the past and is working on a protocol for action if future testing reveals contamination. Education for co-op directors, employees, and members has been a core mission of the statewide Cooperative Association since its founding. Cooperative Network offers 36 different programs at conferences in Wisconsin alone. In Minnesota, varied educational programming was offered through another senior cooperative housing conference and the annual Minnesota Credit Issues Conference. In addition to continued strong attendance at the Credit Issues Conference, the 2013 CoBank Conference set an all-time attendance record. Popular programs offered in both states include Skills for Cooperative Director Success. Beth Knudsen, formerly with the Minnesota Rural Electric Association, joined Cooperative Network this fall in a part-time position planning, coordinating, and implementing all youth programs for both Minnesota and Wisconsin, and assisting with Minnesota Education Foundation work. This past year marked the 50th anniversary of the Youth Leadership Congress at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. Co-op leaders of today, who were among student participants in the original 1963 event, were on hand, underlining the importance of this bedrock educational program. More than 7,500 young people have experienced the Youth Leadership Congress over the past half-century, and electric cooperatives continue their support, with 20 sponsoring student participants in 2013. Finding increased numbers of new co-op employees with no past cooperative knowledge or experience, Cooperative Network offered its first new employee orientation session in 2013. Another seminar for new co-op directors is under consideration for 2014. Another first this year was Cooperative Network's initial offering of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's Operations Safety Leadership courses. The electric industry updates are by far the most popular employee seminars offered by Cooperative Network. This year's edition focused on generational differences in the workplace and understanding those differences to promote a better work environment. There's no collaboration or cooperation without communication, and the Cooperative Network Communications team this year sustained long-established activities and introduced new initiatives. Video recorded at the Co-op's Yes Conference and the WECA Youth Congress has been produced for online viewing to help promote future editions of those events. Social media promotion of co-op educational programming also originated from the Youth Congress, and the use of social media as a component of Cooperative Network government relations made its initial appearances mobilizing opposition to the Minnesota gas tax proposal and advancing co-op interests during Dairy Day at the Capitol. A first-of-its-kind online resource for state co-op councils to share documents and ideas was created this year, and a webinar was presented to introduce it and facilitate its use. A combined rapid response effort by communications, environmental and regulatory, and government relations staff quickly provided farm supply members with guidance in case of media inquiries following the devastating West Texas chemical explosion last spring. The well-regarded Crisis Communications Seminar returns in 2014 for its third appearance, helping prepare key employees to give the public trustworthy information while protecting legitimate co-op interests if a serious mishap should occur. Personnel changes are underway as retiring editor Perry Baird, after 26 years at the helm of Wisconsin Energy Cooperative News, hands off the publication to Dana Kelroy, Cooperative Network's communications director since 2006. Stepping into Dana's shoes as communications director is Jenny Bernhardt, who takes on the task with wide media experience gained during 7 years co-op service with the World Council of Credit Unions. Thanks to generous support from CHS Foundation, the AgStar Fund for Rural America, Land O'Lakes, and the Minnesota Agricultural Education Leadership Council, the Minnesota Cooperative Education Foundation received more than $58,000 in grant funding this past year, a record amount. In 2013, the foundation updated its Understanding Cooperatives curriculum, in use by teachers statewide, worked with the Minnesota State Bar Association on continuing legal education for Minnesota attorneys, and worked with Minnesota farm business managers to disseminate information on the benefits of doing business with cooperatives. The foundation awarded 6 Edward Sletham Cooperative Leadership Scholarships. These assist high school, college, and postgraduate students planning to pursue cooperative careers. Unclaimed capital credits and unclaimed patronage contribute significant funding for the Minnesota Cooperative Education Foundation. All donations are tax-deductible. Cooperatives and other large donors have contributed nearly $48,000 to establish the Charles Van Sickle Endowment, introduced at the end of last year, and cooperatives contributed more than $507,000 to Wisconsin's Federated Youth Foundation during 2013. More than $429,000 was paid out in a total of 589 scholarships, along with other charitable contributions. Collaborating across all co-op sectors. Communicating between decision makers and the broad co-op membership, and cooperating on solutions. Your statewide association practices the fundamentals of cooperative success all year round.